I remember the smell before anything else. It clung to the walls that evening, the way memories cling to the back of the throat. Garlic softening in butter, rosemary crushed between my fingers, the faint burn of something caramelizing, faster than it should. Outside, rain fell with that indecisive rhythm that feels like hesitation, tapping the windows as if asking permission to come in. The house was warm, too warm, the kind of heat that fogged the glass above the stove and made the air heavy enough to push down on my shoulders. If someone had told me that night would mark the beginning of the end, I would have laughed. Nothing ruins you on a day that looks this ordinary. My name is Claire, 42 years old, and back then, I still believed that keeping a home running meant keeping a marriage alive. The kitchen was my territory, though not because it was my dream. It simply became the place where I could still pretend I mattered. The wooden spoon rested against the pot as steam curled upward in soft ribbons. A lemon cake cooled under a thin towel, filling the air with citrus and sugar. The television murmured from the living room, background noise I had learned to mistake for company. A candle flickered on the dining table, releasing the faint scent of vanilla. Everything looked peaceful, curated, almost loving. I didn't know yet how much of that peace was built on silence I had forced myself to swallow. The front door opened with the usual gust of cold air and the wet sound of a coat shaken off. "Long day," my husband called, his voice careless, familiar. Traffic was hell. Daniel stepped into the hallway, loosening his tie, smelling of rain, cedarwood cologne, and the metallic chill of the outside world. Once, that smell meant comfort to me, the return of someone I had waited for. Now it was just another scent that didn't belong to this kitchen, this house, or the version of me that had shrunk quietly over the years. He kissed my temple the way someone stamps a loyalty card, barely touching the surface. "The guys will be here at 7. Did the wine arrive?" "On the counter," I said, stirring without looking at him. He disappeared down the hallway, footsteps steady over the wooden floorboards I had refinished myself last summer because it wasn't the right time to hire anyone. I listened to the house absorbing him, doors opening, drawers sliding, the soft hum of the printer he always forgot to turn off. It amazed me how a person could move through a place so confidently without noticing the hands that kept it functioning. For a moment, everything seemed fine. Not happy. That was a feeling I hadn't tasted in a long time, but manageable, predictable, safe in the shallow way routine can be. Then something shifted. I heard a vibration on the kitchen counter, my phone lighting up with a calendar notification. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced down, expecting something trivial, maybe a reminder to pay a bill or call my sister. Instead, the words on the screen pulled my eyebrows together instantly. Board meeting. Ownership adjustments. Thursday, 10 a.m. Participants. Daniel, partners, investor, ownership adjustments. A phrase I hadn't seen in years. Back when the company was ours, not his. Back when my name was on documents. Back when decisions weren't whispered behind closed doors. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, trying to force neutrality onto my thoughts. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was routine. Maybe I wasn't being erased. But the small sting inside my chest didn't agree. I cleared the notification, hands slightly colder now, and turned back to the stove. The kitchen lights hummed faintly, flickering just once, something they did occasionally when the rain intensified. And yet, in that moment, it felt like a warning, a shiver of electricity running through the air. I stepped away from the stove to check the dining table. The napkins were folded evenly, the plates aligned, the candles lit. Everything looked perfect. That perfection suddenly felt humiliating, as if I had staged a scene for an audience that didn't include me. From the hallway, I heard Daniel's voice. Not conversation, performance. "She doesn't really contribute anymore. She's more at home now. It's better for everyone." I froze. The words were muffled enough that anyone else might have mistaken them. But I knew the cadence of that tone, the crisp, confident edge he used in meetings, the tone of a man who believed every word he said. My pulse quickened, beating sharply in my throat. I told myself I must have misheard, that he meant something else, that I had caught half a sentence and was filling the rest with insecurity. But the tremor in my hand didn't believe the excuses. The rain hit the windows harder. The pot began to boil over, but I didn't move. I stood there in the kitchen that smelled of rosemary and softened butter, feeling something inside me shift, a nearly imperceptible crack forming beneath the surface. When the guests arrived, I forced myself into automatic mode. Smile, greet, serve, disappear. Laughter filled the dining room, clinking glasses, business jargon bouncing from wall to wall, valuation, dilution, majority vote. Words I used to use freely before being slowly pushed out, told kindly, then firmly, then silently, that my role was elsewhere. I slipped into the kitchen with a tray of appetizers, exhaling shakily. My whole body felt too light, like my bones no longer anchored me. Then I saw it. Daniel's laptop, left open on the counter. The screen brightened as if beckoning. A new email notification appeared, bold, crisp, impossible to ignore. Updated clause, spousal exclusion, final version, from legal department. Every muscle in my body seized at once. My throat tightened. My vision narrowed to the single glowing line of text. My fingertips tingled as if they had been plunged into ice water. It couldn't mean what it sounded like. It couldn't be about me. He wouldn't do that. Not after everything. Not after the nights, the years, the sacrifices. Not after the company we built from a cramped apartment and dreams that barely paid rent. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep myself steady. For a moment, I genuinely couldn't breathe. There was this crushing pressure behind my ribs, like someone had placed a hand on my sternum and pressed down slowly. Behind me, laughter from the dining room erupted, bright and careless, slicing through the air like broken glass. I hovered there, suspended between truth and denial, staring at the laptop as if the screen were a window into something I wasn't ready to see. A drop of condensation slid down my glass of water on the counter. The refrigerator hummed. The candle on the table flickered. The lemon cake cooled beside me, untouched, the sugar crystallizing on top. Every tiny detail in the kitchen suddenly felt painfully loud, the kind of details you only notice when your world is beginning to tear open. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. My hands shook so visibly I pressed them against my apron to steady them. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out the sound of the guests. There, in the middle of my perfectly arranged kitchen, I felt the first real fracture of something breaking, not dramatically, not loudly, but with quiet precision. A thought rose slowly, heavily, from somewhere deep inside me. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. I didn't open the laptop, not yet, but I stepped closer to it, close enough for the glow to fall across my hands, close enough for my reflection in the screen to look like a ghost of myself. In that moment, I understood, without the whole truth, without the details, without the evidence, that my life was about to split into before and after. And I felt it in my chest, sharp and unmistakable. The beginning of a fall I hadn't prepared for. If stories like this also make you think, subscribe. It's how we keep finding each other here. I whispered it to myself like a promise to the future version of me who would someday understand all of this. Then I looked back at the glow of the screen, inhaled shakily, and felt the words form inside me with brutal clarity. I'm standing at the edge of something, and I'm about to find out exactly what. I didn't open the laptop that night while the house was still full of voices. I moved around the table, refilling glasses, smiling at jokes I barely heard, my body on autopilot while my mind stayed in the kitchen with that glowing notification burned into it. Every time I walked past the counter, it felt like my eyes were pulled toward the screen, even when it had gone dark again. Updated clause. Spousal exclusion. The words looped in my head like a bad chorus. By the time the last guest left and the front door clicked shut, my cheeks hurt from fake smiling, and there was a tight, buzzing feeling under my skin, as if I'd been plugged into a socket all evening. Daniel hugged me at the door as he said goodbye to his partners, his hand pressed lightly to my lower back, the way he always did when he wanted to signal affection to an audience. Couldn't do any of this without her, he joked, and they laughed, and someone said something about how behind every successful man there's a patient woman. I felt my face stretch into that polite host expression I'd perfected, but inside, something recoiled. As soon as the cars drove away and the red taillights disappeared down the street, The silence that settled over the house was so sudden that it made my ears ring. The ticking of the wall clock above the mantel sounded louder than it had any right to. The dishwasher hummed in the background. A faint drip echoed from the tap. I thought I'd closed tightly. "I'm exhausted," Daniel said, loosening his tie as he came back into the living room. "Big day tomorrow. I'm going to crash, okay?" He didn't wait for an answer. He leaned in, brushed his lips against my forehead, already half turned toward the hallway. "You were amazing as always," he added, almost as an afterthought, like a compliment you give to the staff on your way out of a hotel. I watched him disappear into the dim corridor, heard the bedroom door open, the drawer slide, the soft thump of shoes being kicked off, the murmur of water from the bathroom. My legs felt strangely hollow, like they might fold if I tried to walk too fast. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, my hands hanging uselessly at my sides, and then I turned back toward the kitchen. The laptop was where he'd left it, sitting on the counter near the fruit bowl, the silver surface catching a strip of light from under the cabinets. My hands were damp from sweat and dishwater. I wiped them on a towel, and still they felt slippery. I pressed the trackpad with one finger. The screen woke up instantly, washing my face in cold light. For a second, I saw my reflection superimposed over the desktop, eyes shadowed, hair coming loose from my ponytail, a faint streak of sauce on the front of my shirt. I barely recognized myself. The email was still there, patient, waiting. Updated clause, spousal exclusion, final version. My heartbeat became so loud that it almost drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. The muscles in my chest tightened, a hot, dense pressure building right in the center. My mouth went dry at the same time my palms grew even sweatier. I clicked. The message opened with a polite line from the lawyer, something about "as requested" and "incorporating the protections you mentioned." Attached at the bottom was a document. Shareholders, agreement, amended, final, PDF. My throat worked around nothing. I blinked, trying to focus. There was this surreal sensation like I was watching myself from somewhere slightly above my own body, like a camera hovering near the ceiling. Part of me wanted to close the laptop, pretend I had never seen any of it. Another part, the part that remembered signing early bank loans, the part that had sat up doing spreadsheets while he slept beside me, forced my hand forward. I opened the document. Pages of dense legal language filled the screen, black text on white, each paragraph numbered, each sentence carefully constructed to sound neutral while hiding something sharp. I scrolled, my finger jerking slightly on the trackpad. Purpose, scope, governance, voting rights. My name appeared first in a section titled Original Founding Partners. Seeing it there sent a small, painful pulse through my chest. There I was, on paper, proof that I hadn't imagined my role, that I hadn't fabricated the early years in some nostalgic fever dream. Then, a few paragraphs later, the font changed slightly in my mind. Amended ownership structure. My name vanished from the main table of controlling interests. I had to blink several times before the numbers resolved. Where I had once held a significant percentage, there was now a footnote. Shares held in trust, subject to reallocation upon conditions described in Section 9.3. My eyes dropped to the relevant section, my pulse roaring in my ears. Section 9.3 was titled, Exclusion of Non-Contributing Spouses and Family Members. The words swam for a second. I blinked again, forced myself to read. Spouses and or family members of majority or founding shareholders who are not active participants in the daily management, strategic decision-making, or revenue generation of the company shall be considered non-contributing. In such cases, shares previously attributed to said individuals may be subject to reversion, transfer, or dilution at the discretion of the active shareholders in order to preserve decision-making agility and business integrity. Each phrase hit me as if someone were dropping stones into my stomach. Non-contributing, may be subject to reversion, at the discretion of the active shareholders. It felt abstract for half a second. Then I scrolled further down, and the abstraction turned into a blade. There, under a smaller subclause, my full name appeared. For the purposes of this agreement, Claire Bennett is classified as a non-contributing spouse. The words sliced through me so cleanly that for a moment I didn't feel the wound. I just stared. My hand, resting on the edge of the counter, began to shake so violently that the laptop lid rattled. I gripped the marble surface harder, my knuckles whitening. A hot wave rushed up my chest, into my face, burning my ears. My heart was beating too fast, like it had lost its rhythm. My legs weakened, as if my knees were dissolving. I had to lean my hip against the counter so I wouldn't slide to the floor. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I tried to swallow and there was nothing, just a dry scrape in my throat. A sour taste rose from my stomach, and for a terrifying second, I thought I might throw up right there. I forced a slow breath in through my nose, but that only made the sourness worse. The kitchen smelled like reheated food and lemon cake, and the faint acid of wine left at the bottom of glasses. Smells that had meant warmth suddenly made me want to gag. I scrolled further. There were conditions. There were examples. Domestic responsibilities alone shall not be considered contribution. The phrase glowed on the screen. Obscene. Faint reflections of my own kitchen hovered behind the text. The sink full of pots I'd scrubbed, the spotless table I'd set, the careful arrangement of food I'd cooked after shopping for hours, planning, budgeting. All of it reduced to domestic responsibilities alone, something legally declared irrelevant to value. "This isn't real," I whispered, though my voice didn't sound like mine. "This can't be about me. He wouldn't do this." The clock above the stove clicked as the minute changed. The refrigerator made a soft knocking noise before returning to its steady hum. Somewhere down the hall the pipes groaned as the heater switched on. The ordinary sounds of our home went on, indifferent to the way my reality was ripping at the seams. As I read, memories rose up uninvited, colliding with the sentences on the screen. The clause mentioning initial capital contributions dragged me back to a tiny one-bedroom apartment, our mattresses on the floor, the smell of burnt instant coffee in the air as we argued about risk and possibility. I saw myself unlocking my savings account, transferring money I'd been putting aside for years, just in case, because he'd said, "We're a team, right? If this fails, it fails for both of us. If it wins for both of us." The section describing Founder's intellectual contribution resurrected the night I'd stayed up until dawn, editing his pitch deck, rephrasing lines, fixing the story, while he paced in his underwear rehearsing. The derisive phrase about non-participation in management clashed violently with the image of me, heavily pregnant, sitting at a folding table in our first office, answering calls, sending invoices, pretending my back didn't hurt as I reassured clients that we were stable, solid, professional. One line in the document might as well have been written in blood. In the event of marital dissolution, all shares attributed to non-contributing spouses shall revert to the primary shareholder without compensation, in recognition of the disproportionate risk assumed by the active partner. I reread it 3 times, feeling colder with each pass. Without compensation, in recognition of his risk. As if everything I had put on the line, my job, my savings, my time, my body, my sanity, had been some kind of hobby. "This is not happening to me," I thought, but the words sounded thin, childish, even inside my head. The ache in my chest began to sharpen into something that wasn't just pain anymore. There was a bitter edge forming under it, a rawness that tasted like the beginning of anger. A small sound broke through the static in my ears. Soft footsteps, the faint shuffling of fabric. I snapped my head toward the doorway. Our daughter, Emma, stood at the entrance to the kitchen, rubbing one eye with the heel of her hand, her hair a tangle of sleep. She was 14 now, all long limbs and messy ponytails, standing in an oversized sweatshirt that used to be mine. "Mom?" Her voice was hoarse with sleep. "Why are you up? It's late." She squinted at the glow of the screen, then at my face. I realized only then that my cheeks were wet. I hadn't even felt the tears start. They'd just appeared somewhere between Clause 9.3 and the phrase "without compensation." I closed the document on reflex, panic firing through me like electricity. The desktop reappeared, full of folders with names I recognized and others I didn't. My hands flew to my face, wiping quickly, but my fingers came away damp and trembling. "I couldn't sleep," I said, the lie clumsy, my voice cracking midway. "I was just finishing up some things for tomorrow." Emma padded into the room, the bottom of her socks picking up crumbs from the floor. She glanced at the half-empty wine glasses, the candles burned down to puddles of wax, the untouched slice of cake on a plate near the sink. Her eyes finally settled on me. They were Daniel's eyes, the same hazel flecked with green, but softer. "Did you and Dad fight?" she asked, straightforward in the way only teenagers can be. "You look like you did that weekend he forgot your birthday. Times 100. Her words were like a tiny knife slipped between ribs I'd barely managed to keep together. "No," I said too quickly. "No, we didn't fight. Everything's fine." The room spun slightly as I said it. There was a pulsing at the base of my skull, like my blood pressure had climbed to the ceiling. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Are we in trouble? Like money trouble or something? I heard you guys talking about investors and stuff. And the other day Dad said something about protecting assets and, I don't know, it sounded scary." She looked down at her feet. "Are we going to have to move again?" Her innocence, the way she connected fragments without understanding, sliced me open in a new place. She had seen more than we thought. Children always do. But she only had pieces, and she was asking me if the ground under her was solid while mine was crumbling. I swallowed, my tongue sticking to the roof of my mouth. "No, we're not moving," I managed eventually. "You're safe. We're safe." At least financially, I almost added. But the words tangled in my throat. Was that even true anymore? If I could be written out on paper like this, what else could be taken without me knowing? Emma studied me for a long second. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker clunked in the freezer. A faint draft slipped under the back door and brushed against my bare ankles. Her breathing was slow and steady, the kind of unguarded rhythm that only belongs to someone who still believes the adults will fix everything. "Okay," she said quietly. You don't look okay." She hesitated, then reached out and wrapped her arms around me in a quick, awkward hug. She smelled like shampoo and sleep. I held on to her for a heartbeat longer than she expected, my fingers gripping the back of her sweatshirt. When she pulled away, there was a question in her eyes that she didn't voice. "Good night, Mom," she murmured, turning back toward the hallway. "Good night, baby," I whispered, but my voice barely made it out. I watched her walk away, watched her shadow shrink and disappear. The moment she rounded the corner, something inside my chest splintered even further. It wasn't just my future that was being rewritten in secret documents and careful clauses. It was hers, too. Our daughter had grown up watching me support her father, build his dream, cushion his falls. What did it mean if, on paper, all of that counted as nothing? I turned back to the laptop with a different kind of nausea now. My hands were still trembling, but there was a new steadiness forming underneath the shaking, like solid ground trying to push up through mud. I reopened the document, forcing myself to read every line, every clause, every implication. My eyes burned, my head throbbed, my stomach twisted, but I kept going. Near the end of the agreement, I found another email thread attached, copied into the chain. It was between Daniel and the lawyer. The subject line read, Risk Management and Contingencies. I clicked it with a sense of dread that felt almost physical. There it was, in his own words. "I want to make sure that in case things go south in my personal life, nothing jeopardizes the company," he had written. "Claire hasn't been involved in any real capacity for years now. She's more focused on the family side, which is fine, but she doesn't understand the scale of what we're building. I can't let emotions or a sense of shared past interfere with control. She doesn't understand the scale of what we're building." The room seemed to tilt again. My vision blurred around the edges. Memories collided with that sentence. Nights we'd walked around the block with takeout containers in hand, talking excitedly about when we grow. The two of us scribbling dreams on napkins, arguing about names, colors, clients. I had understood the scale before there was even a structure to scale. I had believed in it when it was nothing but a fragile idea floating between us. In another reply, he'd written, "We have to classify her as non-contributing. I know it sounds harsh on paper, but practically speaking, that's the reality. She runs the house, sure, but the company runs because of the decisions I make with the team." My chest clenched so hard that I pressed my fist against my sternum. Heat surged up my neck, my ears roaring. For the first time that night, my tears didn't feel like helplessness. They felt like acid. His casual dismissal of everything I had poured into both the business and our life together cracked something that had been holding back a darker feeling: anger. It arrived slowly, at first just a warmth beneath the shock, then a sharper burn. Anger at his words, at his certainty, at the way he had reduced me to someone who runs the house, sure, as if that were a side gig, as if the house itself hadn't been the invisible scaffolding that allowed him to climb as high as he had. Anger at myself, too, for stepping back when he'd asked, for accepting that being more at home now meant I was less everywhere else. I thought about our anniversary trip to Italy 3 years ago, the one he'd framed as a romantic escape. I remembered him answering calls at dinner, just a quick check-in, and me telling him it was okay, that I was proud of him. Was that before or after he started asking lawyers how to cut me out? I thought about the necklace he'd given me on my birthday, the same year I signed a power of attorney form because it would make things easier, while they reorganized the company. Had he known then what he was planning? Had every gesture of generosity been a way to soften me for later? The past rearranged itself in my mind like a puzzle whose picture I'd misunderstood for years. Scenes I'd filed under love slid over into folders labeled strategy. Compliments blurred into pacification. Every bouquet of flowers started to look less like romance and more like distraction. My legs finally gave out. I slid down the cabinets until I was sitting on the cold kitchen floor, the laptop balanced on my thighs, the edge digging into my skin. The tile felt icy beneath me, seeping through the thin fabric of my pants. My toes were numb. My hands, though, were burning, as if all the blood in my body had rushed to them. I stared at the words on the screen, at my own name surrounded by clauses that erased me, and something inside me shifted again. Not a crack this time, but a click, like a lock turning in the opposite direction. My heartbeat was still fast, my mouth still dry, my stomach still churned with the urge to throw up. But underneath all that, there was a new clarity, a new sentence forming in the space where denial had been. This is real. He did this, and if he can move pieces on a board without telling me, then I will learn the rules of the game he thinks I'm too naive to play. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear Emma's soft breathing through her slightly open door, reassuring and devastating all at once. My hands steadied just enough for me to close the laptop gently. I looked around at the kitchen, the dirty plates, the half-burned candles, the cake that no one had touched, and I realized with a painful electric jolt that I was standing at the center of my own erasure. A slow, deliberate thought rose up, sharper than anything else that night, cutting through the fog of shock, the ache of humiliation, the heaviness of betrayal. I can't let him do this to me. I can't just stand here and watch my life be rewritten without me. I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs unsteady but holding. My chest still hurt, my eyes still burned, my hands still trembled at the edges. But the core of me, the part that had signed that first lease and sent that first invoice, felt suddenly, fiercely awake. I need to do something. I heard myself whisper into the empty kitchen, my voice low but steady. I can't stay still. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Daniel, who breathed steadily, unaware that the world he'd built around himself was beginning to rattle. Every inhale he took sounded too loud, too calm, too undeserved. I stared at the ceiling while shadows shifted slowly across the plaster, the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. There was a buzzing under my skin, a restless tremor that kept moving from my hands to my chest to my jaw. I couldn't lie still anymore. At around 4 a.m, I slipped out of bed and returned to the kitchen, the tiles icy enough to sting the soles of my feet. The laptop had become a doorway, and once you open a doorway, you can't pretend you don't see what's on the other side. My hands were still shaky when I woke the screen again. The new spousal exclusion clause had been a blow, but now I needed to know what else was buried beneath years of trust. What other versions of reality he had written without me. I clicked into old emails, archived threads, messages tagged in yellow, the ones he had never expected me to read. At first, it was normal business correspondence, investor updates, meeting notes. Then the irregularities started appearing like cracks in sidewalk concrete. There were pictures. At first, harmless ones. Team dinners, holiday parties. But then I noticed patterns. People cropping me out, literal cropping. Photos I remembered taking together now, edited as if I had never been there. Group shots from trips I had planned down to the restaurant reservations. Yet in the captions, he referred to them as strategic retreats, team bonding weekends, founders meetings. I zoomed into a photo from our trip to Chile, the one where I ended up planning everything because he'd been too stressed to deal with logistics. In the email, he'd captioned it, "Founders aligned for next year's roadmap." Founders, plural. Except the only person in the frame was him and his partner. I was behind the camera, erased in a single keystroke. A cold sweat broke across my back. My throat tightened, dry and scratchy, and for a second I thought I might be sick again. I opened another thread. He had forwarded one of my early designs for the company website to a contractor with the message, "Rough concept I put together. Needs refinement." I remembered that night so vividly, I could still feel the ache in my neck from leaning too long over the kitchen table, drawing and redrawing until he said, "This is amazing, babe. Exactly what I wanted." But here, in black and white, he had rewritten the story to delete me. "You ever felt this?" I whispered into the empty room. "You ever watched your own memories get rewritten from the outside?" My voice cracked. I swallowed hard, but my mouth stayed desert dry. As I kept digging, hours slipped by. The sun began lighting the sky with a muted blue, the kind that looks exhausted before the day even starts. Every new folder I opened seemed to know exactly where to hurt me. Financial spreadsheets from the early years, years in which half the expenses had been charged on my credit card, now labeled as initial capital supplied by primary founder. Meeting minutes in which I was once described as operational support instead of co-founder. Messages between him and his sister casually discussing how to protect the company in case Claire gets emotional. There it was again. The assumption that my contribution didn't count, that my feelings invalidated my intelligence, that my place in the company and in his life was convenient but not permanent. I felt a pulse of heat travel up my chest into my face. "Sabe quando tudo o que você viveu passa a ter outro sabor?" I murmured, the question falling out of me without thought, because that's what it felt like. Everything I had ever touched in the history of that business now tasted bitter. Every late-night brainstorming session, every whiteboard covered in our scribbles, every celebratory dinner we'd had when we closed a new client. Rotten, spoiled, contaminated by the knowledge that he had been slowly rewriting the narrative underneath me. I clicked into another folder. Recordings. Short audio notes he'd saved. I put in my earbuds, even though the house was empty, except for the sound of Daniel's distant snoring. The first file was a recording from the year we moved into our second office. He was talking to a friend, laughing. I swear, man, if I had waited for Claire to come around, we'd still be debating paint colors. I just went ahead and made the call. She'll love it. She always does. I remembered that office. I remembered being the one who picked the paint color, actually. Staying up late comparing swatches while he complained he was too tired to think. I yanked the earbuds out too fast, the cord snapping against my wrist. My hands hurt. I hadn't realized I was clenching them so tightly my nails had pressed crescents into my palms. I opened another audio file. His voice again. "It's easier if she thinks decisions are mutual. She gets overwhelmed with details." Overwhelmed. The word made my jaw clench so tightly I heard a tiny crack in my ear, the sound of joints shifting under pressure. "Já confiou tanto em alguém que até o silêncio vira suspeito?" I whispered. I could feel the truth of it vibrating inside me. His silences now seemed full, heavy with everything he hadn't said, everything he hadn't allowed me to know. I went deeper. Old message threads between him and people I once considered friends. That couple we traveled with every year, his parents, even my own cousin. They all spoke with careful vagueness, like accomplices trying not to leave fingerprints. "Of course we'll support whatever protects the company," one message read. "She's been distancing herself from business things anyway." Or my favorite, "Claire has always been better with the family side. It's good she lets you focus." Lets you. as if I hadn't carried half the weight until my spine started to curve under it. A dizzy wave hit me. I grabbed the edge of the countertop to steady myself. For a moment the room spun entirely, the refrigerator humming like a drone, the fluorescent light flickering overhead, the faint smell of last night's lemon cake now sour in my nose. My vision blurred at the edges, a dark vignette forming like a camera lens closing. I sank onto the nearest chair before my legs could give out. My calves were trembling, a fine, irritating tremor that I couldn't stop. My stomach twisted violently. I pressed a hand to it, trying to breathe through the nausea, but every inhale felt like dragging sand into my lungs. I opened his photo archive next, and that was a mistake. There were albums I didn't know existed, trips I remembered to the smallest detail. Except in these photos, I was absent. Our anniversary in Greece, only pictures of him and a friend he claimed had joined us for one afternoon. A New Year's Eve party at his parents' house, every group photo captured at an angle that cut me out. A company celebration where I had stood right next to him, wearing the dress he'd said he loved, cropped so that only his arm remained visible. The erasure was deliberate, consistent, precise. Each photo felt like a punch to the sternum. Slow, deliberate punches that stole the air from my lungs. My vision stung. My throat burned. I tasted metal at the back of my tongue. That familiar warning before tears or vomit. I swallowed hard, but it didn't help. Then I found something worse. A screenshot of a message Daniel had sent to his business partner a year earlier. If we execute this properly, she won't fight it. She'll think it's just a formality. Claire never asks for details. Never asks for details. The arrogance of it. The certainty. The way he counted on my trust as a tactical advantage. The nausea surged again, and I pressed both hands flat on the table, breathing through clenched teeth. Você já sentiu isso? I asked the empty room, my voice low, raw. This twisting? This shame that isn't even yours? I didn't know who I was asking. Myself, the universe, the ghosts of the years I had given him. I stood, pacing. My breath was uneven, my steps shaky. I opened more folders, messages, attachments. Everything I found confirmed one thing. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't one bad decision. It was a pattern, a slow, methodical shift designed to edge me out while keeping me quiet, comfortable, deceived. The spiral tightened around me. Guilt for not noticing sooner. Anger, sharp and hot, rising like a tide. Saudade, a painful longing for the version of us I thought existed. Nojo, at how easily he lied, how smoothly he rewrote our life. Incredulidade. Because how does someone do this to the person who built everything beside them? My thoughts began racing in tight circles. I felt myself sinking into an emotional whirlpool, pulled down, pulled under, resurfacing just to drown again. Then my phone vibrated, a text message. At first I didn't recognize the number. Then I did. It was his cousin, the one who always pretended to like me. The message was short. Claire, I think you've seen something. Please don't involve me in this. My stomach dropped as if someone had cut the rope inside me. So she knew, and she was only scared of being exposed. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding so loudly I could feel it in my temples. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. A hot flush crawled up my neck. This wasn't just Daniel betraying me. It was everyone who had played along silently, politely, while I walked around believing I was still part of something I had helped create. It was a whole chain of complicity. More messages started coming in. Not directly to me, but notifications from his accounts appearing on the laptop screen. His business partner asking, "Did she find anything?" Another saying, "Keep calm, stick to the plan." Someone else replying, "Worst case, she'll accept it. She always does. She always does." The words hit me like a slap. My vision tunneled, and for a second I had to grip the chair to stay upright. A ringing filled my ears, high-pitched and relentless. I felt the anger flare again, no longer warm, now blistering, sharp, something close to fury. But the shock was still there too, clinging to the edges of every thought, making everything feel unreal and hyperreal at the same time. And underneath all of it, humiliation. How long had I been walking around wearing a story they had already rewritten without me? How many smiles had I given to people who discussed my irrelevance behind closed doors? How many times had I defended Daniel, softened his sharp edges, believed in his intentions? I felt dizzy again. A bead of sweat rolled down my spine despite the cold morning air. I pressed a hand to my forehead, breathing heavily. The kitchen felt too small, the walls too close. Then a single clear thought emerged from the chaos, cutting through the noise like a blade through fabric. I need to confront him. Not a conversation, not a question, not a timid request for clarification. A confrontation. I straightened slowly, my legs still weak, my hands still trembling, my throat still raw. But something in me had shifted. It wasn't just pain now. It wasn't just shock. It was resolve. I'm done watching from the shadows, I whispered to myself, the words trembling but unmistakably real. I need to face this. I need to face him. And that was the exact moment I knew. There was no going back. I didn't confront him that morning. I watched him leave instead, watched him knot his tie in the hallway mirror like any other day, kiss the top of my head, say, "Big meeting today, wish me luck," with that same easy confidence. I stood there with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I wasn't drinking, feeling the heat seep into my palms and nothing else. When the door closed and his car pulled out of the driveway, the silence that followed felt like a held breath. I spent the day in a daze that was also, somehow, the clearest I'd felt in years. I forwarded the agreement and all the emails to a private account he didn't know existed. I took photos of the laptop screen. I wrote down dates, names, little phrases that had sliced me open in the night. Evidence. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Between each task, I found myself standing in the middle of a room, staring at nothing, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted out. The hours crawled. The house smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon from the cleaner I'd sprayed on the counters. Outside, the sky shifted from washed-out morning gray to a harsher afternoon light. I moved mechanically, checked a few work-related emails of my own, put laundry in the machine, answered a text from Emma about a group project. My body went through the motions of a normal day, while my mind looped one thought over and over. Tonight. By the time the sun dipped and the streetlights hummed to life, my chest felt too tight to expand fully. I told myself I was ready, that I would stay calm, that I would ask direct questions and not let him twist my doubt back onto me. I set my phone on the table between us in my imagination, hit record in my mind, rehearsed my first sentence. We need to talk about the agreement. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, my whole body reacted before my brain did. My hands went cold. A hot flush shot up my neck and settled in my face. My knees felt hollow. I was sitting at the dining table, but for a second, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stand. The key turned in the lock. That small metallic sound, so ordinary, so familiar, landed in my chest like a hammer. The door opened. Footsteps on the hallway floor. The slight drag of his briefcase against the wall as he swung it off his shoulder. A soft exhale, like he was releasing the day. I stared at the doorway, feeling my pulse in my throat. He appeared a moment later, loosening his tie, his expression the easy, tired one I'd seen thousands of times. When he saw me sitting at the table, his eyebrows pulled together slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Hey," he said slowly. "You're sitting in the dark." Only the overhead light above the table was on, casting a small, contained pool of brightness around me. The rest of the house was in shadow. "Everything okay?" "Close the door," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, controlled, as if someone else were speaking through me. "And put your phone on the table." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your phone. Here." I pointed to the empty spot in front of him. Face down. He let out a short laugh, the kind he used at networking events when someone told an unfunny joke. "Wow, that's a greeting." But he did as I asked, slowly, watching me. The phone landed on the wood with a dull thud. The silence after felt heavier. "What's going on, Claire?" he asked, sliding into the chair opposite mine. The smell of his cologne reached me. Cedar, amber, something smoky. It used to make me feel safe. Tonight, it made my stomach twist. I took a breath that didn't quite make it all the way in. "I went through your laptop last night," I said. No preamble, no soft entry. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's not okay," he said, a defensive note creeping into his voice. "You know that, right? That's a violation of—" "I read the new shareholders' agreement," I cut in. "The clause about non-contributing spouses, the part where my name is listed. The emails with the lawyer, the messages with your partners, your cousin." His skin went a shade paler. For a second, his eyes flashed. Guilt, anger, panic, I couldn't tell. Then the mask slid back into place. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and tried for reasonable. "Claire," he said, adopting the tone he used with clients who didn't understand technical terms. "You're taking this out of context." Context. I let the word sit between us like something rotten. "The context where I mortgaged my future for this company, and then you quietly wrote me out of it? That context?" "It's not like that," he insisted. His voice sharpened. "This is legal structure, protection. The lawyers insisted we needed clear lines of control. You haven't been involved in years." "Not really. It's just a formality. A formality that says I'm non-contributing," I shot back. "A formality that says if we separate, everything I helped build goes back to you. Without compensation." "Your words." His gaze flickered away for a second, to the sideboard, to the shadows beyond the table. His jaw worked. He was breathing a little faster now. "You read my emails too," he said quietly, like he was testing the ground. "All of them," I said. "Enough to know this wasn't a last-minute idea. Enough to see timelines, dates. How long, Daniel?" He rubbed his hand over his face, suddenly looking older, worn. "I don't know," he muttered. "It came up a couple of years ago with the first big investor. They want stability, predictability. They don't want to wake up one day and find out half their control depends on somebody's divorce lawyer. This is standard. Everyone does it. So when you asked me to sign those routine updates," I said slowly, each word like glass in my mouth, "you knew exactly what you were doing." "I knew I was protecting the company," he snapped, some of his patience cracking. "Our company. Our daughter's future. You think I enjoyed those conversations? I hate legal stuff. I did what had to be done." I laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised both of us. "Our company? The document doesn't say our company. It says your company. It says I don't count. It says everything I did was, what was the phrase? Domestic responsibilities alone." His gaze dropped to the table. His fingers drummed once against the wood, and then stilled. "Because in the last years," he said quietly, "that's what it's been. You chose to step back, Claire. You chose to focus on home, on Emma. I didn't kick you out of the office. You left." "I left," I repeated, my voice trembling, "because you asked me to. Because there was too much overlap. Because someone needed to keep things stable at home. Because you were losing focus, worrying about a million things, and I thought I was helping." "And you did help," he said quickly. "You do help. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just saying they don't see that as company contribution. It's not me, it's how the world works. Law and business don't care about emotions. They care about who signs, who decides, who's liable. I'm in the meetings, I'm on the hook. I carry that risk." "The risk," I said, my hands curling into fists on my lap, "that I paid for. With my money, my time, my body, my—" "You're being dramatic," he cut in, his voice rising. "This isn't betrayal. This is structure. You want to call the lawyer we used? He'll explain. He'll tell you this is normal, that we're just aligning things with reality. You haven't touched a contract in how many years? Don't you dare use normal like a bandage," I said, my own voice climbing now. "You didn't even have the decency to talk to me, to sit here at this table and say, 'Claire, this is what they're asking. This is what it means. This is how we can protect you too.' You blindsided me. Worse, you counted on me not looking." He flinched at that. A tiny movement, but I saw it. His eyes finally met mine fully, and for a second I saw something like shame. "I thought," he trailed off, exhaled harshly, "I thought it would scare you. And you were already anxious. Every time I brought up restructuring, you shut down. I didn't want to fight about hypothetical scenarios. I just wanted to move forward." "So you moved forward without me," I said. "You rewrote the story and hoped I'd never read the new script." It's not like I was planning to screw you over, he said, the word awkward in his mouth. God, Claire, I love you. This house, this life. Don't, I interrupted, my throat tightening. Don't say you love me and then tell me why it made sense to erase me. Those things don't fit in the same sentence. He leaned in then, elbows on the table, his eyes searching my face. They were a little bloodshot, the skin under them darker than usual. His breathing was uneven. Listen to me, he said. The company is the most important thing I've ever built. It's not just a job, it was ours, I said. Quiet, but the words sliced through his sentence. It was the most important thing we ever built. You turned it into something that exists above us, beyond us, and then you offered me up as collateral. That's not fair, he insisted. You're twisting. I'm reading, I snapped back. Your words, your lawyer's words, your cousin's messages, your partner's laughing about how I never ask for details. His face changed at that, subtle and frightening. Something closed off behind his eyes. You went through everything then, he said. Personal messages, family. You really didn't respect any boundary. I'm done respecting boundaries you only draw to keep me blind, I said. My whole body was shaking now, adrenaline burning under my skin. How long have you been planning to make sure I walk away with nothing if this marriage ends? He opened his mouth, closed it again. His gaze skittered away. When he spoke, his voice was lower. 2 years, he said finally. Maybe 3. When things started getting serious with the investors, when it wasn't just us in a tiny office anymore, they pushed for protection. I adapted. That's what leaders do. Leaders. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. So for 2-3 years, I said slowly, you've been coming home, kissing me, asking me about my day, telling me about your wins. And all the while, you had a plan in motion to strip me of any claim to what we built if I ever dared walk away. He rubbed his forehead. You're framing it in the worst possible way. How else is there to frame it? I asked. Explain it to me. Use that pitch voice they love so much in the boardroom. Sell me this betrayal. He stared at me, jaw clenched, chest rising and falling. The seconds dragged. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove past outside, its headlights sliding across the window, briefly lighting the tight lines around his mouth. There's no betrayal, he said finally, but the certainty was gone from his voice. There's fear. There's pressure. There's being told that if I don't secure control, I can lose everything I've fought for. I panicked. I made choices that made sense on paper. I didn't think you'd ever need to know the details because I didn't imagine us falling apart. We weren't falling apart, I said. You were preemptively protecting yourself from a version of me that doesn't exist. A gold digger, a vengeful ex, someone you clearly think would burn the company to the ground out of spite. That's how you see me? His eyes filled with something then. Regret, maybe, or the beginning of realization. No, he said softer. I see you as the person who could destroy me if she wanted, because you know where all the bones are buried, because you were there for all of it. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is? Something inside me recoiled. So your solution, I said, was to bury me too. He didn't answer. From the hallway, a floorboard creaked softly. We both turned. Emma stood there in oversized pajamas, barefoot, her hair in a messy bun. Her eyes were wide, glistening in the dim light. I hadn't heard her door open. I hadn't heard her approach over the sound of our voices. How long have you been there? I asked, my voice breaking. Long enough, she whispered. Her gaze darted between us. Are you getting divorced? The word hung in the air, bigger than the room. Daniel stood up quickly, his chair scraping the floor. No, he said. No, sweetheart. We're having a tough conversation. Adults have those sometimes. You're yelling, she said. Her voice was shaking. You never yell like this. Not about work. This isn't just about work, I said quietly, my eyes still on her. But whatever happens between us, it is not your fault. Do you understand? Not even a little. She nodded slowly, but her bottom lip trembled. Dad? She turned to him. Did you do something bad? His shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked small in a way I'd never seen. Not like the confident man who strode into rooms and commanded attention, but like a boy caught with something broken in his hands. I made some decisions about the company, he said carefully, without talking to your mom the way I should have. And that hurt her. I didn't mean to. You didn't mean to? I repeated, a bitter edge slipping into my voice before I could stop it. You spent years signing papers. He shot me a look, a silent plea not to do this in front of her. But there was no version of this where she stayed untouched. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Are we going to have to move? She asked. Am I going to have to choose who to live with? Am I going to be one of those kids who spends Christmas in 2 houses? My heart cracked open at the picture in her mind. We don't know anything yet, I said, forcing my knees to hold me as I stood. But you won't have to choose sides. You have both of us. That doesn't change. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. Go back to bed, Em, he said softly. Please, we'll talk tomorrow. I promise. This is grown-up stuff. She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to see behind his face. Then she looked at me. Are you okay? She asked. The question sliced me open. I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, I admitted. But I will be. She took a few hesitant steps back, then turned and disappeared down the hallway, her shoulders slightly hunched. A door clicked shut. The house swallowed the sound. Silence followed. Thick, suffocating. Daniel turned back to me. You see? He said hoarsely. This is exactly what I wanted to avoid. Chaos, fear. I didn't want our life to become a fight over percentages and clauses. You turned it into a fight the moment you decided you deserved everything, and I deserved trust without information, I said. My voice had gone oddly calm. You thought I'd never look. You miscalculated. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes were bloodshot now. His breathing was uneven, his chest rising and falling too quickly. The tension in the room felt like a thunderstorm waiting for a lightning strike. I can't do this, I said finally. The words surprised me with their simplicity. I can't share a bed with someone who drew up legal plans to cut me out. I can't sit at this table and pretend we're just stressed about work. I don't know what this marriage looks like tomorrow, or next week, or in a year. But I know one thing for sure tonight. He swallowed. What? You leave this room, I said. Tonight you sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow I call a lawyer of my own. From now on, every conversation about the company happens with me at the table, or not at all. And you don't sign a single piece of paper that even touches my name without my consent. Those are the bare minimum terms for us to even consider anything. He stared at me like I had spoken a language he didn't expect me to know. Then he nodded once, slowly, as if his neck had turned to stone. That's it? He asked. No chance to explain? No forgiveness? I've been forgiving things I didn't even know you were doing for years, I said. We're past apologies. We're at consequences. The words hung between us, heavy, final. He picked up his phone, his hand shaking slightly, and walked toward the hallway. At the guest room door, he hesitated, turning back to look at me. His eyes were unreadable in the low light. Claire, he said. Just my name. No argument, no plea. I didn't answer. He disappeared into the room. The door closed with a soft click, and then there was nothing. No television murmuring in the background. No dishwasher running. No footsteps. No whispered calls. Only the faint buzzing of the light above the table and the distant hum of the refrigerator. The house, which had always held our laughter, our fights, our plans, seemed to empty out all at once, every sound sucked into some invisible vacuum. The silence was so complete it pressed against my eardrums, almost painful. I looked around, at the chairs, at the walls, at the family photos that suddenly looked like evidence of a life that no longer existed, and I understood, with a clarity that took my breath away. Nothing about this place, or this marriage, or this version of me would ever be the same again. Time didn't explode after that night. It leaked, it seeped, it dragged and rushed in uneven waves, like a tide that couldn't decide whether it was coming in or going out. The days stopped having clean edges. There was the night at the table, the door to the guest room closing, and then suddenly there was a morning where my coffee tasted like paper and my phone screen showed the number of a lawyer I never imagined I'd call. The first weeks were all logistics and adrenaline. I sat across from a woman in a calm office with pale walls and a plant that didn't look real. She wore a navy blazer and had the kind of steady gaze that made you feel both seen and dissected. I slid the printed documents toward her, the amended agreement, the emails, the thread about non-contributing spouses. She read quietly, her eyes moving quickly, a pen tapping once against the folder. "You did the right thing making copies," she said eventually. "You're not crazy. This is deliberate." The phrase, "you're not crazy," loosened something in my chest that had been locked tight for days. I hadn't even realized how much I needed to hear it. There were more meetings, papers, drafts. Terms like equitable distribution and valuation and spousal rights became part of my vocabulary. I forwarded things, signed others, refused some entirely. Sometimes I'd hang up the phone and sit on the floor of the hallway, my back against the wall, my heart pounding, feeling like I'd just sprinted even though I hadn't moved. Emma watched us with wide, wary eyes. We decided to tell her together in the living room on a Sunday afternoon that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and tomato sauce. We didn't use the word divorce yet. It was too sharp, too final for a process that still felt like a question mark. We talked about changes, about separate paths, about still being a family. She nodded like she understood, and then went to her room and slammed the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I didn't follow her right away. I sat on the couch, staring at the dent her body had left on the cushion, listening to muffled music coming through her wall. In the months that followed, time started marking itself in holidays. Thanksgiving came first. Normally, we hosted. The house would be full of noise and relatives, everyone talking over everyone else, the kitchen a chaos of steam and scattered utensils. That year, I cooked a smaller meal, just a turkey breast, a few sides, a pie I bought instead of baked. The table was shorter. We used only one leaf instead of two. Emma sat across from me, picking at her food, her hair falling into her face. Daniel spent the holiday with his parents, and for the first time in years, I didn't see them. The empty chairs at the table looked louder than the ones we used. Christmas lights started appearing on the neighboring houses while I was still trying to figure out how to breathe normally. One evening, standing by the window, I watched someone across the street wrap their porch in bright white lights. The reflection shimmered in the glass, overlapping with my own face. Our house, for the first time since we'd moved in, stayed dark. No inflatable snowman on the lawn, no wreath on the door. I told myself it was because I was tired. The truth was, I didn't know what story to tell with decorations anymore. The old one didn't fit, and the new one hadn't formed. Emma was the one who pushed me. "Can we at least have a tree?" she asked one afternoon, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed. "It doesn't have to be, you know." She gestured vaguely, meaning our usual over-the-top, color-coordinated production. Just something. So we bought a smaller tree. We decorated it together, just the two of us, with mismatched ornaments from boxes I hadn't opened yet and a string of lights that blinked one color too bright. At one point, she held up an old ornament, a ceramic house with our names painted on the roof. "Do we still put this up?" she asked. I swallowed. My throat felt thick. "If you want to," I said. She turned it in her fingers and then hung it near the back, hidden behind a branch. Unseen but still there. Maybe that was the only honest place for it. On Christmas Eve, it snowed lightly, the kind of snow that melts as soon as it touches the ground. Daniel came in the afternoon to pick up Emma, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his shoulders hunched. We had agreed on a schedule. She'd spend that night with him and his family, and Christmas Day with me. We exchanged a few practical sentences in the hallway. He looked smaller to me now, somehow, but the damage inside me didn't shrink with him. "Call me if you need anything," he said to Emma, kissing the top of her head. "I mean it." "I know," she replied, not fully meeting his eyes. After they left, the house exhaled. I wrapped myself in a blanket on the couch and watched a movie I barely saw, the lights from the tree casting colored shadows across the room. The silence felt less violent than that first night, but it still buzzed with absence. I made myself a cup of tea, then forgot to drink it. It cooled on the coffee table, the surface forming that thin skin that always made me wrinkle my nose when I was a kid. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about all the small things that go cold when you're not paying attention. New Year's Eve was quieter than it had been in decades. No party, No countdown with friends. No midnight kisses. Emma went to a friend's house. Daniel was somewhere else entirely. I stood on the back porch at midnight, holding a mug of coffee, watching distant fireworks bloom over the town. The bangs and bursts of color felt disconnected from me, like I was watching someone else's celebration. I whispered a single sentence into the chilly air. Next year, I choose me. It sounded cliché, even to my own ears, but it was something to speak into the dark that wasn't just loss. The legal process marched forward with its own rhythm. There were meetings about division of assets, about my shares in the company, about formalizing what should have been mine from the beginning. I learned to ask precise questions. I learned to say, no, that's not acceptable, without apologizing. Once, after a particularly brutal meeting where an associate tried to convince me that accepting a smaller settlement would make everything less contentious, I sat in my car in the parking lot and screamed. Not words, just sound. A raw animal noise I barely recognized. When it was over, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat, looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and saw someone I hadn't met before. Tired, red-eyed, but not broken. I started therapy in late January, after my lawyer slid a small card across the desk and said, "Even the strongest people need someone neutral." I sat in a soft chair while a therapist with kind eyes and a notebook asked me questions that felt too simple and too hard. When did you first feel invisible? What did you believe your role was in the marriage? What would it mean to you to be enough for yourself alone? Sometimes I cried so hard I couldn't speak. Other times, I sat in silence, staring at the pattern in the rug, surprised to feel a faint sense of relief in just having someone witness the mess. The house changed slowly. At first, I didn't want to touch anything. The couch was the same, the art on the walls, the plates in the cupboards, all selected together, all contaminated with shared taste. But as the weeks became months, I started moving things. I took down photos of us on vacations and put them in a box in the closet. I left up the ones of Emma on her own. I repainted the bedroom a different color, something softer, something that didn't hold the memory of me lying awake, counting the cracks in the ceiling. I bought new sheets that he'd never slept on, with a pattern he would have said was too busy. The first night I climbed into that bed alone, the silence was deafening. But the next night, it was just quiet. And a few nights after that, it was almost peaceful. New rhythms formed with Emma. On the weeks she stayed with me, we developed little traditions that had nothing to do with him. Tuesday night pancakes for dinner, Friday movie nights where we watched terrible films and rated them with too many categories. I taught her how to cook the dishes she liked best, not as a way of grooming her into some future caretaker, but as a way of giving her a sense of competence, of control. We chopped vegetables side by side, the sound of the knife against the cutting board a steady tick. Once, as we stirred a pot together, she said quietly, "You seem different, Mom. Less afraid." The word startled me. I hadn't realized she'd seen my fear clearly for so long. There were hard conversations with family. My mother called, her voice a mix of outrage and worry. "I never liked how much you sacrificed," she said. "But I thought it was your choice. I didn't know he was—" She cut herself off, the anger catching in her throat. Sometimes her support felt like a warm blanket. Other times, it felt like an accusation, as if she were asking silently why I hadn't been wiser, stronger, earlier. I tried not to carry that weight too. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months, the kind who had slowly drifted away when I was too busy being the supportive wife, reappeared in my messages one day. She'd heard somehow. "There's always a leak. Do you want coffee?" she wrote. "Or wine? Or just someone to sit on the couch and not talk for a while?" I said yes. She came over with takeout and soft socks for me because real adults own more than one pair of comfortable socks. We sat on the couch, eating noodles out of cartons, and I told her pieces of the story. She didn't interrupt to play devil's advocate. She didn't tell me to be grateful it wasn't worse. She just listened. When I finished, she looked at me, eyes bright, and said, "You were never just the wife. He just liked it better when you believed that." That sentence lodged itself in a quiet place in me, glowing faintly. Some days were almost normal. I would wake up, make coffee, answer emails, go grocery shopping, fold laundry, help Emma with a school project, scroll through news stories, and feel okay. Not happy, not yet, but functional. The pain moved to the background, like chronic noise you eventually learn to live with. Then there were days when it rushed back to the front without warning, triggered by a song on the radio, by a shirt of his I hadn't thrown away yet, by the smell of his cologne on a stranger passing me in a store. On those days, I let myself cry. In the shower, in the car, behind sunglasses on a park bench, and then I made dinner anyway. One afternoon in early spring, I caught myself laughing, really laughing. Emma had told a stupid joke, something about a teacher and a vending machine, and for some reason it hit me just right. I laughed until my stomach hurt, until tears ran down my face for a reason that wasn't destruction. She stared at me like she'd just seen a rare animal in the wild. "What?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "Nothing," she said, but she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months. I just missed that sound. It struck me then that I'd missed it too. The company battle resolved slowly, like a bruise fading. There were negotiations, compromises, stubborn lines I refused to let them cross. In the end, I didn't walk away with everything I thought I deserved, but I didn't walk away with nothing. The narrative shifted on paper. Not a non-contributing spouse, but a founding partner who chose to step out. It was imperfect. It still hurt. But when my lawyer slid the final agreement across the table and I signed, I felt something unclench in my chest. A door, finally closing. Not gently, but firmly. As the one-year mark from that first night approached, the calendar filled itself with echoes. Our wedding anniversary came and went. I didn't mark it. I noticed it like you notice an old scar in the mirror, briefly, with a pang, then moved on. Emma's birthday arrived, and we managed a joint celebration without yelling, handing cake across the table like colleagues sharing a project. It was strange. It was bearable. Sometimes bearable is a victory. The house, by then, no longer felt like a museum of our marriage. It was something else. Not fully mine yet, but no longer his. The living room held new cushions I'd chosen without imagining his opinion. The kitchen contained the same pots and pans, but they were arranged differently. I'd hung a small print on the wall above the sink, a line from a book I loved. She didn't know she was drowning until someone showed her the shore. Some mornings, I'd catch myself reading it while the kettle boiled and feel that quiet, unexpected swell of gratitude. Not for the pain, never that, but for the fact that I was, slowly, learning to swim. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, this time actually drinking it before it cooled. The house was calm, no storm of documents waiting, no guest room door closed on a man I couldn't recognize anymore, just the tick of the clock and the faint sound of my daughter's music leaking under her door. I looked around at the room where everything had broken open, and I realized something. It still hurt. The betrayal, the erasure, the years of silence. The past was not some clean chapter I could shelve and forget. It lived in my muscles, in my reflexes, in the way I sometimes flinched when someone said, "trust." But it no longer dictated every thought, every breath, every choice. For the first time, the future didn't look like a punishment or a blank page. It looked like a path I might actually have a say in shaping. The past still ached like a bruise you press without meaning to. Tender, sensitive, always there. But as I sat there, hands wrapped around a warm mug in a house that was slowly becoming mine again, I understood. It hurt. But it didn't command everything anymore. The smell comes first, just like it did on the night everything quietly shattered. But this time, standing in my kitchen a full year later, the scent of garlic softening in a hot pan doesn't feel like a prelude to loss. It feels like something simple, almost tender. The sizzle is familiar, but in a different register, no longer weighted with dread. The air is warm in the same way, the windows slightly fogging, but I'm not bracing for anything. I'm not waiting for a door to open and for my life to fracture again. I'm just cooking dinner on a Tuesday. The lemon cake cools on the counter, like it did that other night. But this one is Emma's favorite recipe, and she made it mostly on her own. She left flour on the stove, smudges on the fridge handle, and a wooden spoon in the sink that she forgot to soak. I'll remind her later. The mess doesn't tighten my chest like it once would have. It makes me smile. The kitchen light hums above me, the same hum that once felt like the only sound holding me upright in the silence of shock. Now it's just a light, slightly old, slightly loud, slightly due for replacement. The symbol hasn't left. It just evolved. I know now that meaning isn't fixed. It shifts when we do. Our house is quieter these days, not because something is missing, but because nothing is hiding. There are no conversations behind half-closed doors, no legal drafts disguised as updates, no negotiations masked as affection. The silence, when it settles, is clean. It rests on the furniture instead of pressing against the walls. Emma comes into the kitchen, her socks sliding on the floor, her hair still wet from her shower. She's taller now, or maybe she just stands straighter. A year of navigating pain and confusion has carved something fierce and gentle into her all at once. She looks at the stove, at the cake, at me. "You didn't burn the garlic this time," she says, smirking. "I'm healing," I answer, and she laughs. The same laugh that once brought me to tears on a night when I had forgotten what joy felt like. She opens a cabinet, grabs 2 plates, sets them on the counter. I watch her move around the room with ease, with the comfort of someone who knows this house is still home, even if its foundations shifted. We've had countless talks, some whispered late at night when she couldn't sleep, some sharp with frustration, some soft with sorrow. The emotional vocabulary of our lives expanded this year. We've had to say things no child and no mother wants to say out loud. And somehow, in the ruins of what she thought her family was, she found a truth that didn't break her. People leave, but love can stay. Daniel and I separated officially 3 months ago. No screaming, no courtroom theatrics, just 2 people signing the final forms of something that had died long before paper made it real. He rents an apartment across town now, a clean, neutral place with white walls and practical furniture. Emma goes there some weekends. She comes home with stories that don't hurt like I feared they would. Stories about mediocre takeout, awkward dinners, attempts at normalcy that she describes with a mix of compassion and teenage disdain. She's learning to hold both, the father who hurt us and the father who still loves her. Children understand contradictions long before adults admit they exist. Sometimes he and I talk, mostly about Emma, sometimes about logistics, rarely about the past. He's smaller now in my mind, not the giant he once was, not the villain he became during the discovery, but a flawed man whose fear and ego cost him more than he ever imagined. There's no fairy tale redemption arc here. There's accountability, there are boundaries, there is distance, there is the quiet knowledge that forgiveness and coexistentia are not the same thing. On nights when Emma is with him, the house feels different, not empty, just calmer. I light a candle on the coffee table, the kind I never bought when he and I lived together because he complained scents gave him headaches. This one smells like cedar and smoke. I read more now. I sleep diagonally. I talk to friends I had let drift. I go to therapy every Thursday at 3 p.m., a rhythm I once resisted and now treasure like oxygen. There are moments, tiny, ordinary ones, that reveal how much I've changed. Like the day I fixed the leaky kitchen faucet on my own. I watched a video tutorial, bought the part, knelt on the floor with a wrench that slipped twice in my hands, and did it. When the dripping stopped, a laugh escaped me before I could catch it. Not because the faucet mattered, but because it symbolized something I had convinced myself I couldn't do. I'd spent years believing that competence in the home wasn't real contribution, because that's what I'd been told. But that lie dissolved with each small act of rebuilding. I take walks now, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emma, sometimes with a friend who became a surprising constant in my life these past months. He's not a romantic interest. Not yet, maybe not ever. He's simply someone who sat beside me in silence on days when silence felt heavy. Someone who let me talk without trying to solve me. Presence without pressure. There's a kind of healing in that I never understood before. The documents are all closed now. The negotiations ended. The division of assets is finalized. The custody schedule is stable. The legal dust has settled. And yet healing didn't arrive in a single moment. It came in pieces. In the first night, I slept 8 hours again. In the first time, I made plans without checking whether they aligned with someone else's ambitions. In the first morning, I opened my eyes and didn't feel dread waiting at the foot of my bed. Tonight, as the garlic finishes cooking and the pasta boils, I realize something I didn't expect. I am not afraid of the future anymore. Pain still visits. In memories, in scents, in old photographs I haven't decided whether to keep or throw away. But it doesn't drown me. It brushes against me like a reminder of someone I used to be. A version of me who thought loyalty meant silence, who thought love meant sacrifice without question, who thought stepping back was the same as support. She isn't gone. She just isn't steering anymore. The worst day of my life was the day I realized I had been erased from the very thing I helped build. But that was also the day a quieter, more powerful truth stepped forward. If I could survive the erasure, I could survive the rewriting. If I could rebuild the story, I could rebuild myself. The sound of the front door opening breaks my thoughts. Emma's back. She went to check the mail. She steps into the kitchen holding a flyer for some local event I know she'll forget about in 2 hours. She sets it on the table, then leans against me, her head briefly resting on my shoulder. "You smell like garlic," she says. "Always," I answer, smiling. She inhales dramatically. "It's a good smell now," she says. "It didn't used to be." Her words land in me like a soft shock. She's right. The symbol returned. The meaning changed. The wound healed around it, but didn't erase it. And that's enough. Life doesn't return to the version it was before. It becomes something new, shaped by what stayed and what didn't. We plate dinner together, setting the dishes on the table in a room that once held the worst conversation of my life. Now it holds something else. Resilience, laughter, possibility. The walls remember, but they don't echo. We sit. We eat. We talk about school, about work, about whether we should paint the hallway a different color. The lemon cake waits on the counter for dessert. Outside, the streetlights flicker on. Inside, the home I reclaimed settles around us. And I realize, fully, finally, the past still aches. But it no longer commands anything.